All right, welcome everyone to our OER Project Presents session tonight. My name is Ebony McKeever, and I am the Senior Engagement Manager for OER Project, and we're excited to have you all here with us tonight. Joining us for this OER Project Presents is Dr. Diptée. Dr. Diptée is going to be talking to us about propaganda versus history, decolonization during the Cold War. The other thing, we have a surprise giveaway. Well, maybe it's not a surprise, but we will be also giving away 5 copies of Dr. Diptee's book for 5 random folks today in our audience. And so there will be more information about that later. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Diptee right now.
Well, that was a surprise even to me.
Surprise!
That was the surprise of all surprises. Okay. Just two little things. Ebony's controlling my PowerPoint because apparently today's not my day as far as my PowerPoint is going at home. So if you see me wave or something or just say Ebony, you'll know why. It's so that she can move me forward. So thank you all for being here. I know that you all have lots on your plate, and I appreciate you taking the time to be present. I want to start really quickly by letting you know what I'm not going to do. I am not going to give you a presentation on decolonization during the Cold War. Instead, I just want to discuss some pedagogical, discuss this topic from a pedagogical point of view. So engage with topics, with themes and issues relevant to teaching decolonization during the Cold War with you, my fellow educators. The other thing I want to sort of preface this with is that I specialize in Caribbean history. I've been trained in African history. My research has been on both those areas. And so for that, you're going to find that my examples tend to come from those areas. Okay. There's a third thing I'm going to tell you is that my PowerPoint, half of my PowerPoint slides disappeared like half an hour ago. So so that was the other third interesting thing that happened today. Anyway, so I think we have most of them back, and we're just gonna move forward. Ebony, we can go to the next slide. I think I'm going by memory here. Exactly. So so this is what how the presentation is going to unfold. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what I see as my pedagogical mission in the classroom because it helps explain my strategy for how I go about developing my teaching modules. I'll tell you a little bit about my pedagogical mission. Then I'll move into the teaching module, which really is presenting you with certain kinds of evidence and telling you some of the questions I've developed around it to get students to understand and grapple with the issues that are part of my pedagogical mission. And then I was hoping that we could go into some discussion groups. And then I'll end with a way for you to get some teaching resources if you feel you need them or you're curious about what I might use in my class. So that's how things will unfold. We can move to the next slide. So the mission. So a few years ago, I'll just start with a story. Historians are storytellers. A few years ago, I had a student named Sean. He was in my world history class. It was a first year student, so fresh out of high school. He himself was not a history major. He was specializing in public affairs and policy management. Great student, did well in the class, had a great relationship with him long after he left my class. However, at the end of the term, Sean came to me and asked me a very interesting, he made a statement and then asked a very interesting question. And he said to me, Prof. Diptée, I really liked your class. It was interesting. Clearly he was a bit of a history buff, even though he wasn't a history major. But I do not understand why I need to know any of those things that you taught us. I mean, I found it interesting, but I'm in public policy, and I don't get it. Why do we need to know any of this? So at that moment, in many ways, I felt that Sean was asking me, is history usable? Next slide, please. Is history usable? In other words, are the historical stories that we tell, is the historical data that we compile and we present to students, is any of it have any use today? And clearly, I had taught Sean for 12 weeks, and he left my course not knowing. So I felt that was a major pedagogical fail on my part, and I really wanted to try and remedy that. So I spent a lot of time after that trying to experimenting with strategies so that I could leave my students with no doubt that we can operationalize historical knowledge. We can mobilize historical knowledge in the present. Now, if we think about it from the student's point of view, students are future oriented. They, perhaps I'm being a little optimistic about the next generation, but I still find them still very idealistic, and they want to agitate for change, societal change, however they imagine it. In other words, they want to learn things that can be used in the present so that they can influence future outcomes. That's what they're interested in, which is why when I taught my course, and Sean, who was in public affairs and policy management, because clearly he was thinking about how he could make a change in the future, I left him thinking history was of no value to him. It was not useful. It was interesting, but of no value. So in order for, we can go back one actually, Anthony. So in order for me to make it easier for students to see the value of history in the present, I changed the story I told about history. I started to change the story I told about history, and I continue to tell about history. Historians are, after all, storytellers. We are storytellers that operate within a particular framework, and we use specific methodologies. And as storytellers, we understand the power of a historically informed story. So because of that, I made it my mission. We could go back again, Ebony. Because of that, I made it my mission to use historical stories to convince students that history is about the future. It is future friendly. So how do I do that? And what does that mean? Now we can change that slide. Now, this is going to be obvious to people who teach history, but I have learned that it's really, really important, at least to the students I teach, that I underscore this distinction. I make it really clear, and I use it as I organize my course material, regardless of the topic. So to you, it will be obvious, but I'm sure you might agree that for most of our students, this is not going to be obvious. And so it's become a guiding principle for me as I teach, in an effort to answer that question that Sean asked me so many years ago. So I emphasize that history is the study of the past, but it is not the past, obviously, that we contest historical interpretations. We contest. I saw a message that went up there. We contest historical interpretations in the present, and that those contestations are really battles over the future. So we contest historical interpretations in the present, and we have lots of evidence of that. Debates over statues going up, how we name streets, etc. Those are actual debates. Messages are popping up. Is everything okay? Is everybody hearing me?
Yes, everything's okay. I just need to go in and turn my notifications off.
Oh,
Since I was
okay.
sharing at the last minute, I didn't turn everything off.
Okay,
I'm
no
doing that
problem.
now.
Okay. Are we good? I'll continue. I lost my train of thought there for a second.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. So as we talk about this, so I emphasize to them that we contest these historical interpretations in the past, and I try to organize modules that way, and that those contestations are really battles over the future. So I think that we can change that slide. I think we can change that slide, Ebony. Okay. So now let me talk a little bit about the teaching module. The trick with using this approach that I have is really that how do I convey to students that to develop, how do I convey to students this idea? How do I underscore this distinction that I believe is so important? How do I use this pedagogical framework while simultaneously teaching them some good old-fashioned history about decolonization and the Cold War? So that's what I've been attempting to do. And I found that, you know, my module on decolonization and the Cold War works really well when I built it around an example that I take straight out of the, well, I can't even say the history books because we learned about this quite recently. But that comes out of the past. And I built it around what is now known as Operation Legacy. And Operation Legacy is an excellent example for use in the classroom as a pedagogical tool because it does all the heavy lifting that we need it to do. It shows that history is usable. It makes clear that history is about the future. It shows the ways in which powerful people try to control how history is written. And it does all that while simultaneously introducing students to important content. The concept of the archive. It will also reorient their thinking about the Cold War so that it's much more than just the United States versus the Soviet Union. It will make students aware of the repercussions that the Cold War had in the global South. I think we can change the slide. So Operation Legacy was put in place between the 1950s and the 1970s. And that's more or less the duration of it, but each colony experienced it at a specific moment. And that specific moment was just before it attained its independence. The goal of Operation Legacy, interestingly, was to destroy or secretly remove colonial documents just before the colonies got their independence. And the criteria used was among a number of things, but quote unquote, any documents that would embarrass Her Majesty's government. So they were to remove these documents so that, and they were to do it in a way that locals would not know. So this is like straight out of the documents that, and this was circulated throughout all colonies that were affected by Operation Legacy. As an alternative to fire, it is permissible to pack papers to be destroyed in well-weighted crates, and sink them in deep and current-free water. And I want to emphasize that only a handful of colonial officials were aware that this was taking place. You had to be. So if you were a colonial official and you were in one of the British colonies, you had to be born in Britain. You had to be white. This was explicitly stated. And you had to have a certain security clearance to even know that this was taking place. If you were below a certain security clearance, you had no idea. And so because of that, they developed code to hide certain documents. So they developed something called the personal series, which I'll talk about a little bit later when I'm giving you the example of British Guyana. So I can go on and tell you about Operation Legacy, but I thought it would be useful at this point to have you look at a very short video. I wrote the script for this video. It's a TED-Ed video. It is actually, I think, quite useful in the classroom as well. And so it'll do double duty. Today, it will fill in some of the blanks around Operation Legacy, and at the same time, you can assess it for its value in the classroom if you decide to use this.
In 2009, 5 Kenyan people took a petition to the British Prime Minister's office. They claimed they endured human rights abuses in the 1950s, while Kenya was under British colonial rule, and demanded reparations. They had vivid accounts and physical scars from their experiences, but their testimonies were undermined. They had no documentary evidence that Britain sanctioned systems of torture against Kenyans, at least not yet. Thousands of secret files were waiting to be discovered. In 2010, a historian joined the trial as an expert witness and attested to having seen references to missing documents. They noted that Kenya had repeatedly requested the return of stolen papers, which the British government had refused. In fact, many historians suspected there were gaps in the archives. As a result, the court ordered the release of any relevant documents, and days later, British officials acknowledged that 1,500 pertinent files were being held in a high-security archive. It soon became clear that these were just a small sample of documents Britain hid between the 1950s and 70s, while former colonies declared independence as part of a widespread colonial British policy called Operation Legacy. The policy was for British colonial officers to destroy or remove documentation that might incriminate Britain and be of strategic value to the new governments. They were instructed to destroy, alter, or secretly transport these papers to the UK. Documents slated for destruction were to be burnt to ashes or sunk in weighted crates far from shore. During the trial, between 2010 and 2013, an independent historian revealed they had located more than 20,000 previously hidden Operation Legacy files from 37 former colonies. Finally, an estimated 1.2 million colonial files sprawling kilometers in the archive's so-called special collections were also exposed. And these were only the documents that British forces kept. How many were destroyed and what information they contained remains unknown. About 3.5 tons of colonial documents were slated for incineration in Kenya. Ultimately, Operation Legacy's objective was to obscure critical aspects of the truth. In the words of Britain's Attorney General in Kenya, if we're going to sin, we must sin quietly. So, what really happened in Kenya? Beginning in 1895, the British administration forcibly removed people from their traditional lands, giving the most fertile areas to European settlers to establish large-scale farms. They mandated forced labor systems, implemented reservations for indigenous African peoples, and restricted their movement. Kenyan people resisted these incursions from the start and grew increasingly organized over time. One movement, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, aimed to forcibly remove white settlers and overthrow the colonial government. When the British declared a state of emergency in 1952, they were giving themselves permission to take otherwise illegal special measures to regain control. The newly revealed Operation Legacy documents confirmed that people suspected of participating in the resistance were subjected to horrible abuses. Between 1952 and 1959, the British imprisoned over 80,000 people without trial, sentenced over 1,000 people convicted as terrorists to death, and imposed extreme surveillance and interrogation tactics. Some people were beaten to death. Others were raped or castrated. Many were shackled at the wrist for years. Children were killed. One person was burnt alive. Ndiku Mutwiwa Motoa testified to being castrated while handcuffed and blindfolded. Wambugu wa Nyingi said he was suspended upside down, beaten, and had water thrown on his face until he could barely breathe. Jane Muthoni Mara said she was sexually violated with a hot bottle and imprisoned for years without cause. In response to the new evidence, the British government issued a formal apology and made an out-of-court financial settlement with the 5,228 Kenyan claimants ultimately involved in the case. The original 5 claimants had made history and paved the way for it to be rightfully rewritten. The uncovered files challenge fundamental myths about British colonialism as a benevolent institution that brought freedom and democracy to its subjects, then graciously gave them independence. Instead, the newly exposed evidence confirms what many people knew to be true because they lived it and survived to rescue history from the ashes. Smoke blanketed Delhi as British officials destroyed documents preceding Indian independence in 1940.
So, I guess at this point, I just wanted to ask, put out a question. Maybe you can respond in the chat. If any of you had heard about Operation Legacy, or you've thought, or you think it might be something that's useful in the class, anything along those lines. So for Molly, very useful. Okay, when we go into plan to use it tomorrow. When we go into the group discussion, I wanted us to talk a little bit about how we could use this kind of material in the classroom. So one of the questions that I came up with, and we have 4 examples. I'm looking at Operation Legacy around 4 different cases, 2 involving Kenya, and 1 involving Jamaica, and 1 involving British Guyana. For the 2 involving Kenya, I've proposed some questions, and for the ones around Jamaica and British Guyana, I've actually just left a question mark, and I thought in the group discussions we would talk about how we could use that material in the classroom. And also, I want to encourage you to perhaps refine my own questions, because these questions sound good to me, but I would like to hear if you have better ways of articulating these questions, and you will get a link to it when you go into the group, so you don't have to worry too much right now. Okay, so the questions are organized around historical silences and evaluating evidence. So that's how I've grouped them. I imagine there are tons of other ways to do it, but that's the way I have done it. I've organized the material. That's the way it sort of sits with me. Now, I really love this video because I think it does an excellent job of highlighting the 3 distinctions that I was trying to set up. It shows us that history is about the past, that history has been written a particular way. It shows us that people are contesting history in the present. That's what those Kenyans did in their court case. And it also showed us, I mean, you might have to underscore it, highlight it for students, but it also makes clear that Operation Legacy or allows us to imagine that the ways in which Operation Legacy was really an attempt by the British Colonial Office, or the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, to what I would say is control the future. And we see evidence, I haven't provided it here, but because my research project is actually on this, but we see evidence of that in the records, where they are really, really concerned about future relations with people in their former colonies. So a big part of this hiding of documents was to make sure that they didn't have the right information to make proper assessments to develop their relationship. So the argument that I make, this would not necessarily be something that you want to take to your classroom, but is that as they were shifting from colonialism to political independence, from colonies to political independence, what Britain was attempting to do was to give them political independence, but not economic independence. So they wanted to maintain that economic asymmetry, make sure that they did not have the kind of sovereignty they need. And a big part of that meant hiding documents and making it difficult for people from the Caribbean to write the kind of histories, or Kenya, sorry, to write the kind of histories that they would need to change their future, Okay. So the question that I have used, or I would like to use in the classroom, is that the 5 elderly Kenyans involved in the Mau Mau case had no written records. All they could offer as evidence were their memories of being subjected to human rights abuses and the scars on their bodies. And so the question I would pose to the class would be, when presented with written evidence, why is it also important to reflect on perspectives of people who are not included? So that would be how I would tackle it. But again, I'd like, after you do your group discussions, I'd like to hear how you might refine that question. I think we can change the slide. Okay, so the presentation today is about, has the word propaganda in it. So I thought it would be appropriate to show you some British propaganda about the Kenyan anti-colonial conflict. This is really useful, particularly when you juxtaposition it against that video that I just showed you. I'm not sure what's the correct order. I suppose there is no correct, but if you should show that video first or this video, you're gonna have to make that call. I tend to use the TED Ed video first, but you can let me know what you think. Let's get this one rolling. Ebony.
In Nairobi, capital of Kenya, Europeans and Africans still walk the streets in fear of the dreaded Mau Mau. For it is that band of fanatics whose bloody deeds have cast a dark shadow across the face of Kenya. A week ago, the people of Kenya read of the death of Chief Nderi, murdered by terrorists. And now, as they watch the funeral of this wise and peaceful chieftain, they wonder, where next will the Mau Mau strike? Troops are in the streets of Nairobi. Sir Evelyn Baring, the governor, salutes the men of the Lancashire Fusiliers who have flown in to help clear his colony of the Mau Mau menace, which has struck fear into Kenya's very heart. Nairobi police have been supplemented by hundreds of civilians, many of them women, to help round up the Mau Mau bandits. Radio-controlled cars with armored vehicles are used to carry out the army's plans for bringing in all suspects. More than 3,500 have been arrested already. All have to be carefully checked by police security men, for in such a decisive swoop as this, it is all too easy for the innocent to suffer. The objective of this secret society is to drive all white men out of Kenya. Not only fanatics fill the ranks of the Mau Mau, many have joined from fear. Day after day, hour after hour, lorries bearing police and troops drive away from the capital and head for the country. Along twisting roads, they travel deeper, ever deeper into the heart of the African jungle. For here, many of the Mau Mau are hiding. Overhead, aircraft join in the search. All who carry the mark of the Mau Mau must be hunted out so that peace may come to this troubled colony.
Okay, so here I have some discussion questions that I have put together for use in the classroom. Again, I'd like to get your input on this, to ask the students. This was clear propaganda, obviously, and this is a real video from the 1950s that was shown to people in Britain while this was going on in Kenya. All right. So, it really is interesting when you think about what the propaganda that we just saw about the Mau Mau. And they didn't call themselves that. They were actually the Land and Freedom Army is what their official name was, right? The Land and Freedom Army. Because that's what they saw themselves trying to do. They were trying to, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. They were trying to get access to land and to get a certain level of freedom. And that was how they saw their fight. They saw their fight as getting rid of the colonizers. That's not the way it was obviously being presented to the British public. But at the same time that we see this kind of narrative, and by the way, I don't want to say that these people did not commit atrocities. That is not the point. They did commit atrocities as well. So this is not, but I am saying this is more a story about who has the power to tell the story, and whose power and whose story gets remembered, and what it takes to deconstruct that or to undermine those very, very powerful stories. So here are some of my questions. What do you think was for the students, obviously, okay? So again, this might be too simple, or you might want to refine it. What do you think was the purpose of the video here? And again, these questions would play out differently if they watch the first video, if they watch the TED Ed video first, or they watch this first. Whose perspective does the video represent? And if, again, because this is about evaluating evidence, right? So trying to get them to think about evaluating evidence. If using this video to write a history of insurgency in Kenya, what are some of the issues that need to be considered with this type of historical evidence? In other words, all evidence is problematic. So it's a way to get them to look at something that is so obviously biased, and to think about how they can use it, because we come across evidence in the archives all the time that all evidence comes from somebody's perspective, and we can't take it carte blanche. We have to ask critical questions of it. And so this is just asking them how they might use this, if it is even possible to use it. I don't know if that's too advanced a question to ask students, depending on what level you're teaching. But again, I'd like to get your feedback on that. Ebony, I think we can go forward. Skip that one because it shows up later. This is where I was trying to do things. Skip that. Skip that. Skip that. Group discussion. Might have to come back to that one. Skip that one. Okay, so here we go. So the next example that I wanted to draw your attention to was British Guyana, present day Guyana, as an independent nation. It is the only English speaking former British colony in South America. So in many ways, it's considered part of the Caribbean, even though it's located in the South American on the continent, South American continent. So we're gonna look at British Guyana. Now, British Guyana was going through a very interesting situation that overlapped with what was happening in Kenya. So it's a really nice example. It's the other part of the world, but both of these places were being managed by Britain. And so at this time, and I should tell you, there's more here but I don't talk about it today, but there's the Malaya emergency, there's Kenya, there's British Guyana, and I think there's a fourth somewhere else happening in the British Empire. So from the point of view of colonial officials, the entire world has gone to hell. Like, what is going on in our colonies? From their point of view. From the point of view of all these people that are in the colonies, they're like, it is time for us to dismantle colonialism. And so and just as importantly, they are talking to each other. We know this, that they are talking by letter, old school, to each other. and they're trying to exchange ideas. So they, even though this is happening during the Cold War, and they are very aware, obviously, of communism and that kind of thing, they are talking about this as an anti-colonial battle. And so that's how they've framed it. And this is how they are willing to grab onto whatever theoretical model they need to get rid of, to liberate themselves from colonialism. This is the kind of general thinking that's going on in their minds. So to bring it back to Operation Legacy, if we can change slides for a second. Okay, so this was posed as a question, but I'll just tell you the answer. Guess the number of files destroyed in British Guiana. We have 0 files left for British Guiana. And now I don't mean 0 files on the planet. I mean that all the Operation Legacy files, all the files that were taken, we have none on British Guiana. And this is remarkable. It is absolutely remarkable for a couple of reasons. And if we change slides, please. It's remarkable because in 1953 in British Guiana, just to give you a sense of the level of planning and strategy that went into this, and again, remember, this was done by telegram and by letters and maybe phone calls, right? That's how this was happening. In 1953 in British Guiana, April 27th, British Guiana has its first democratic election by universal suffrage. This is the first time people in the colony could actually vote across, regardless of how much land you have, what your wealth and status is, etc., etc. So they have an election. And at that point, the PPP wins, People's Progressive Party. It's led by Chetty Jagan, who you will see in a video in a second. And this creates a bit of a problem for the British because they're not great fans of Chetty Jagan. Chetty Jagan is very critical of British colonialism. All right, so April 27th, he goes into power. By May 15th, British Guiana, so this is like almost 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks, is included on the personal series. The personal series is code. Personal series is code. That means we are now going to create a separate set of records, and we're going to call it the personal series. And these are things we do not want the people that work in the colonial office who are low level or the locals to know about. So up until then, colonial records were just colonial records, and now they're like, okay, now we need a double set of records. So we're going to put Chetty Jagan's in power, May 15th, a couple of weeks later. And then by October 9th, Britain declares a state of emergency. They suspend the constitution. Chetty Jagan and his allies are arrested. And so this first democratic election stands for naught. And then the governor at the time, I think his name was Alfred Savage, took the political reins in British Guiana, and ran and handled things for another 2 years. So in other words, it is remarkable that we have no records. Firstly, because we know here, because we've seen letters saying it's on the personal series, but none of these records that were eventually released and put into the National Archives in England are on British Guiana, which means that they have destroyed everything that they had hidden. So this is really, really powerful. They have destroyed everything that they have hidden. Let's go to the next slide.
Into London Airport comes the man around whom revolves the grave situation in British Guiana. Dr. Chede Jagan, the deposed Prime Minister of the colony, is here to protest against the government's claim that he and his American-born wife led a plot to make Guyana a communist-controlled state. While reading a prepared statement on the situation, Jagan has Mr. Lyndon Burnham, chairman of the People's Progressive Party, by his side.
We were shocked and still are at a loss to understand the action of the British government in sending military and naval forces to British Guiana, in suspending the constitution, and dismissing the democratically elected ministers of the government.
Dr. Jagan, who is claimed to have received instructions from behind the Iron Curtain and consorted with communists, has this to say about the accusation.
I have been only once, and that is with the youth festival. That's all the connections I have behind the Iron Curtain.
Commenting on allegations that he sympathizes with the Mau Mau, Dr. Jagan says,
Mau Mau is a terrorist organization. We do not support terrorism. But I would say that the people in Kenya, as in other parts, have their problems, many problems which have been created by British imperialism, and these problems will have to be settled.
Okay. So this is another example of where we can talk about historical silences. So, but again, I want to be clear. These are just historical silences from the Operation Legacy files. There are people that have written about British Guiana using records that were not in the Operation Legacy files. The CIA has had files that have been released, so we can use a lot of American sources. And we know from those other sources that the Americans were also involved in this. Now, the big difference here between British Guiana and Kenya and anywhere in the Caribbean or Latin America, for that matter, is their proximity to the United States. So at this point, you have lots of conversations going on between the United Kingdom and the United States as they try to be very mindful about who gets into political power, as well as protecting corporate interests, because the point of these colonies was to create economic opportunities for corporate interests, so sugar production, et cetera, at least in Guyana, in British Guyana. So we have evidence available to us. We just know that the damning Operation Legacy evidence is missing. And given that Chede Jagan was supposedly a communist and all of that, or he was open to entertaining conversations with communists, etc., it is remarkable that they have no records, because these are exactly the kinds of people that they would keep records on. So here I have a big question mark, and so I would say when you go into your discussion groups, that it would be I would ask you to think about how you might use this to get students to talk about historical silences. And then we're going to go to and there's no video for this, but I'll just show you. I'll juxtaposition a couple of things. This is a clip from the Jamaica Gleaner. So Jamaica celebrating its independence. The princess opens the first parliament, and you'll see where it says UK and Jamaica wish to maintain bonds of friendship. So this is, wow, this is how we're going forward on Jamaica. If you go to the next slide. Here we see Sir Alexander Bustamante greeting the princess. So everything seems fine. This is going to be a great moment, etc. We are happy that you're going off into, political independence. Your state has political independence. You can change the slide. And at the same year that all of this is happening, we see this in the archival records, which is sift all records to ensure that none are left which should not be seen by the government of an independent Jamaica. So we have all this information. We have the public face in the media, in the photographs, the official statements, but in the Operation Legacy files, which are now available to historians, those that exist, we know that there was another sort of dynamic taking place in the colonial office. So next slide, student activity. Okay, so now I'd like us to go into groups, into the group discussions. And if you go to the next slide, Ebony. Okay, so Ebony, just to be clear, you have a link to a PowerPoint, a PDF PowerPoint, which has this. So if you put them in each of the groups, they should all be able to see it. So here are like 3 sort of guiding questions. These are just supposed to, guide you, but if you want to go down another avenue that you feel more useful in your group, feel free. But how would you use these resources in your room? What kinds of questions would you ask students to help them grapple with evaluating evidence and historical silences? And would you refine any of the questions that I myself asked of these questions? And maybe I just want to ask one question to those of you that are in attendance. What level are you teaching at? If you can let me know in the group chat. Okay. So we have a nice range. We have a nice range. So, I mean, that obviously is going to determine the kind of questions that are going to be asked. So, at this point, I would say that we'll put you in discussion groups for maybe about 12 minutes or so. And then we'll ask each of the groups to come back and let me know what questions you came up with or how you might use it. Or if you thought of anything you could use to refine the discussion questions. And we'll do that for a few minutes upon your return. We're going to end the presentation with me just showing you a slide about how to get additional resources. I've been working on some material, both stuff I've written as well as images or historical cartoons and that kind of thing that can be used in the classroom. So I will be happy to share that with you if any of you are interested at all. Some of it, a little bit, it might take me a few days to get it to you just because of copyright. I need to clear a couple of copyright things. But outside of that, I would be delighted. So I'll end with that slide. But for now, Ebony, if we can put them into groups with the link, and have them there for about 12 minutes.
Absolutely. So I'm going to send you all into the breakout rooms, and then I'll come into each breakout room and place the questions and also the link in your room. So you'll go first, and then I'll come visit everyone. All right. I think we have just about everyone. Yep, looks like everyone is back from their breakout rooms. So welcome back. All right, Dr.
So thank you, everybody. You've come back. So I take that to be a good sign. You didn't run away. So I thought we'd just start with the groups and give everybody maybe 1 or 2 minutes to talk about which of the questions that you found useful and that you focused on, and what kind of conclusions you came to. So maybe we'll start with group 1. I don't know if people remember what number they were in, but I will say the group with Christy, Kim, Samantha, Sarah, and Theodora. Any of you can speak, you can jump in. Are they there, or maybe they left?
Okay, I'm here. Sorry, I was having logistical problems.
Okay.
So I would say, I think to sum it up, our group sort of said like it was new information, I think, to all of us. So at least some of it. So while we liked your questions, I don't think we felt like we could, I think we all felt like we wanted to know more and explore more before we figured out what else we wanted to ask. Does that make sense?
Oh, perfect.
It sort of like piqued our interest and we want to dive deeper and figure out what else is there, because I feel like there's a lot that you could explore here and I don't know enough yet.
Okay. All right. And so I guess, does that apply also for like how would you use these resources and that kind of thing? It's still a little too early for you to tell.
Yeah, I think we all said we would use them. So it's just thinking about like our own curriculum and exactly how we fit it in, and can we use it this year or is it like a next year thing? And
Okay.
but yeah, I think they're excellent. It's really interesting and great materials. I love the videos are great, but also just, I don't know. It's like it's disturbing and fascinating. So I think important to talk about.
I like that those two words you just used there, disturbing and fascinating. All right, well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Let's go to room 2, which is Fatima, Jamie, Katie, Valerie, and Vivian. Anyone can jump in.
I'll go ahead and say the information I think was a little mind-blowing in the sense that, I guess we had no idea that there was this operation that was out there. And then I kind of made the point that this the silence, right? The silent groups out there, and who's going to speak for the silent is, I think, a compelling question for scholars. We call our students scholars at my school. That this is a question that could potentially be drawn out in these final 2 units for AP. So who's going to speak for the silent? I think this is something that could potentially, personally, I think could potentially be drawn out into like an LEQ or something like that the scholars could chew on for those final 2 units. But anyway, that's what I was thinking and kind of what I brought out in our discussion.
Out of curiosity, what are the final 2 units?
Well, it's the Cold War and decolonization, and then globalization.
Okay, got you. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to say anything or?
We also talked about maybe adjusting it into a jigsaw or maybe a stations kind of activity, so the kids could explore the sources a little bit more in depth.
When you say a jigsaw, what does that mean to?
Like you can put them in groups of 3, and so like one kid does Kenya, one kid does Guyana, one kid does Jamaica.
Nice.
Or you could have them like all together, and then they rotate through the stations, and then you'd have them manipulate the stuff a little bit more.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. That sounds like a great idea. Room 3, Brittany, Emily, Jill, Layla, and Mike. Anybody can jump in.
I think so. So in our room, first of all, we all discovered we're on the East Coast, which was nice. I was like, yeah, East Coast gang. But we really talked about how, I mean, many of us in that room are currently or about to embark on sort of the topic of decolonization. So it was very fitting and very relevant to many of us. But also, none of us had any idea about this operation. I find, I use a lot of themes in my classes, and I think this is fantastic because it connects to so many things. And we imagined using it, as an opening salvo to sort of bridging between sort of the years of colonization and then this sort of pivot turn into the years of decolonization and sort of its long-reaching impacts. But I could see my kids really getting into this because it's an untold story, and they love sort of the untold underdog type of story. They really dig into that. So I think we all sort of agreed that our kids would be interested, not just because it's an interesting and terrifying story, but because we are also intrigued by it. So that's a little contagious. So they dig it too.
Thank you. Anybody else from that group want to say anything? Okay, we'll go to group 4. Eric, Javier, Jim.
I can go quickly for our group. We were talking definitely, this a fantastic source. I know Eric was talking about questions, kind of working with the students on terms of like, why would a country want to do this? What is kind of the motivation behind hiding these storylines here? So you kind of look at sourcing with this situation. You could maybe do, change in continuity over time. I think you have some causation that comes into these pieces. So we talked a little bit about using kind of like a driving question and kind of this is the question we have going into our research. And then throughout the life of our research here, how is your thinking going to change? We thought these videos would be perfect for that, to kind of drive that question and pique that interest there. And then we spent a lot of time talking about how we can get students then to kind of write this up. And we talked about, like the ACE writing strategy. Our students are pretty good at being able to kind of answer certain questions and pick out evidence from primary sources. They're not so great at being able to kind of extrapolate on how those sources then kind of have some meaning to that prompt and are relevant to the prompt. We didn't really have any big changes in terms of questions. We thought we had some really good ones there. We were just going to kind of tweak them minorly for our own purposes, but we thought it was ready to go, and I think we're all going to use it next week.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Jim. We can go to room 5, which is Emily, Jennifer, Catherine, Laura, and Molly.
Well, we like the activity. It's shocking, but it's necessary to include. And I was thinking about the order that you presented. I don't know. I would like to learn first what are the ideas that students bring to the classroom. If they have a previous idea about these topics and how do they think decolonization took place, or how do they imagine the process. So and get their feedback, and then I don't know really, because I haven't used this material, but I guess that probably they are not going to have this cruel version, right? So I think that maybe what I'm going to do is use the second video first to if they think that it was a process that was not violent, or that is, because this is basically what we get in media. I was telling the group that that's what when I'm shocked when I hear or when I read that the royal family in Great Britain goes and visits other places that were colonial territories, and this is a happy event. And so maybe using the second video that you showed us first would reinforce the idea that they may bring, and then bring the second one to break that perspective, or to bring another perspective. And I like what everybody said so far, what Jim shared with us, how you can use, if time permits, the materials to help students, or to ask students write an investigation, or dig deeper into these topics. I think it's fabulous.
Thank you very much, Laura. I really love that point that you're making about finding out where they're at and how they imagine the decolonization process. So just, and also getting them to commit that however you do it. I use a word cloud sometimes. I'm like, put the first 3 things that come to your mind when you hear the word decolonization, and they, there's a program called Mentimeter that I use. So they pull out their phones, they scan, and we get the word cloud, and it gives us a sense. And then we go through some material, and we get them to do it again, and we see how that has shifted, how the words that come to their minds have shifted after a couple lessons. So I think that's a beautiful idea, because then they get to trace the changes in their own thinking as well. Thank you so much. We can go to the next group, which is group 6, I think, with Conrad, Gretchen, Megan, Paul, and Scott.
Yeah, I was actually saying that I wish that I'd had these sources last week. I have an oddly short semester. Tomorrow is actually the last day of school. And so just talked about decolonization and the Cold War, talked a little bit about Kenya and actually about the airlifting of documents out of Kenya. And I really love that TED Ed video, and I love that propaganda video, and it would have been such a great resource, something to go ahead and show my students while we were talking about this. It really would have enriched the story I was trying to tell about decolonization against the Cold War backdrop.
Oh, I'm glad that but at least you knew about it, right? So that's great. And I can promise you the video will be there next year. Small consolation for this year, but it'll be there next year. Anybody else from room 6 had anything to say? No? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, this wasn't something we got a chance to talk about, but Laura had mentioned just kind of the, how would I say this? The example of Princess Margaret in Jamaica is really standing out to her as like standing in stark contrast. And one piece that I would also say that would be great that now I'm reconsidering how I would put these documents in conversation with each other is the way that I also introduce imperialism is by using an excerpt from Jamaica Kincaid's like 1980 something book, A Small Place, and just looking at the opening. And so just assessing what are the impacts, what can we expect from that? But I think also revisiting that idea and seeing what the actual process of disentangling oneself from a colonial empire entails, I think could also be impactful to students.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gretchen. Let's go on to group 7, which is Katie, David, Delaney, Natalie, and Ro. Anybody can jump in.
So the one thing that I had thought would be not necessarily the same documents that you used, but a way to address the overall idea would be to split the class in half and give half of them the British version and give half of them the other side, and have them kind of look at what are the details and then come back together and say, okay, what's missing? What pieces, just for that firsthand knowledge of looking at those documents to see where that's missing.
I like that idea. I like that a lot. Anybody else from the group?
We had, I don't remember which one of my group members mentioned opening with this, how they start their imperialism unit. But they open with, of course, the White Man's Burden poem and then that comic strip. So I think it's important to establish and make sure our students remember, like, what was the mindset of the British when they decided to start colonizing Africa in the first place. And then we talked about jigsawing and comparing and contrasting not just the viewpoints within Kenya itself or whichever region we're looking at, but also like to expand our focus, like how does British imperialism and then the anti-colonialism look like in India compared to the Kenya versus in like Egypt, different places like that, to give our students a better perspective. I'm sorry if you hear noise. My dogs are dying.
That's fine. And I didn't say this, but I have to tell you that even though Operation Legacy is officially considered to have started in the 1950s, which means that that's when the first time the word showed up in the early 50s, it doesn't mean that they weren't burning documents before. They burnt documents in India, they burnt documents in Malaya, they burnt documents before. It became official policy when they started to circulate like maybe 5, 6, 7, 10-page documents to all colonial officials across the globe. But it was happening before. They just refined it and developed rules around it in the 50s and 70s. And yeah, no, certainly, Ro, I think expanding it beyond would be really, really interesting. And again, I have resources that I've been collecting that look at India, that look at Ghana, I believe. So you know, once I get them together, I'll be happy to share with anybody that might be willing to, that would like to use it. Okay, next would be Isla. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Isla, Corinne, Tim, and Tom. Anyone from that group? Isla, Corinne, Tim, and Tom? Or we could go on to the final group, which would be Ashley, Patrick, and Wilbins.
Sorry, this is
Yeah.
Karen from that last group. Sorry.
That's okay, Karen.
So Tom, Tim, Isla, and I, we ranged from middle school into college. And a couple things came up in terms of just like videos and how we use videos and, you know, how long, attention span, etc. Also, how to link this to kind of contemporary experience or contemporary event, and thinking about the ways in which power structures control or manipulate information. We thought that might be a way for students to access it. And then just the challenge in general of going into singular events as opposed to kind of larger scope discussions. So we kind of bounced around.
Okay, wonderful. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Excuse me, sure. Yeah, I'm excited to use this in my classroom. I think maybe it was Karen who brought up Laquan McDonald. Or was that someone else? I forget. But yeah, relating it to current events, making history relevant, making sure students know that we're, it's not just the British in the past. We've been guilty of this at the same time and more recently too.
Okay, wonderful. So let's go on to our final group, which would be Ashley, Patrick, and Wilbins. And any of you champions can jump in and close up shop for us.
Yeah, thank you for thank you for everything. But B, yeah, I mean, thank you for our small group of three. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was great. I mean, we had a great discussion, especially in terms of how to kind of, especially when you use that date of 2010 is so close. I mean, it's that is so relatable in terms of to be able to kind of start it with 2010. I mean, if I'm looking at in terms of I don't want to go off the topic that much, but in terms of like say Tulsa Massacre that the kids like don't know about, and we're learning more and more and more about it. It's I think that is what kind of can engage them more as close in their lifetime. I think that is key, and then to be able to relate it back. I mean, I learned a lot, so my brain is overwhelmed. But yeah, I think it's all about trying to really break it down, depending on whatever level that you have. It's about really breaking it down. But to see it from other perspectives besides the European perspective is key.
Yeah, thank you. And I like the fact that you talked about that 2010 being relatable, because the funny thing is that even though I'm a historian and I know the importance of chronology, I try to not teach chronologically, like just present one thing after the other after the other. I try to dip in and dip out as necessary to deal with concepts. Wilvin, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that, or are you okay?
I mean, that was a good group. Thank you, Patrick and Amy. I did mention that there's fact and basically evidence and opinion. And especially since they learn, a lot about, imperialism, and with industrialization going on. And in fact, I did mention we did talk about I talk about, there's a documentary called, Guns, Germs, and Steel. So how they can, not only they watch video, how they can connect, for me, it's all about, connection. Question would be like, what would you do if you are the Kenyans, what would you do in that case after, you do your research, you got your facts, you got evidence, what would you do in that situation? And why did the European, colonize, what was the reason for that?
Mhm.
And not only that, like for them to dig deeper, to think deeper, how, what would you do in that situation? Would you, fight? Would you, like those five, Kenyans did? What would you do in that situation, and how would you do it differently?
Mhm.
So, that's what, I mean, I talk about, in my group.
Thank you very much, Wilbins. Okay, so we're just past our time. So what I want to ask Ebony to do is just go on to the next slide really quickly. Next slide here. And here you'll see a little you could either go to the website, propagandaversushistory.com. It's versus spelled out that way, or I experimented with a QR code. Hopefully it'll work. We'll see. If you click on the QR code, if you scan the QR code, it should take you. It will ask you to, it'll take you to my website, and it'll put in your email, and I will email once I have everything compiled in the next day or two. I'll gladly send it to you, additional resources. Yeah, so that's it. I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. I know how much work you guys have, and I appreciate you being here. And it was fun sharing some thoughts with you, and really glad to hear about how things are going in your classroom.
And I would like to also echo that sentiment. Thank you all so much. I know the end of the year is here, and for some of us is already here. But how hectic the end of the year can be for our educators inside the classroom. I have to say the end of the year and the craziness that comes with it is one of the things that I do not miss about being in the classroom. So thank you tonight, or thank you all so much for joining us tonight. The 5 random winners of Dr. Diptée's book will be notified by email in the coming days. And I hope you all join us May 29th for our last OER Project Presents of the year, where we'll be talking to New York Times bestseller David Wallace Wells. And everybody will get a free digital copy of his young adult book. So yeah, thank you tonight for your engagement, participation, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.